Hey, Indian Creek 8th grade students, it's Professor Blazek, and I'm here today. It is Tuesday, April 21st, with our e-learning lessons for language arts and social studies. I hope everyone had a great day yesterday on Monday, and let's jump into our daily updates. So, as always, we'll begin with a review from yesterday. We had 39 out of 51 people who turned in their attendance, which that should say for the 20th. But we are 39 out of 51, a little bit lower than we've been seeing traditionally. Normally we start the week off really well, and then maybe Thursday or Friday would be the days where not as many people are turning it in. But that could just be because we're not doing as many journals or whatever it is. But if you didn't submit the attendance, just please go through and do that whenever you get the chance to. We had 16 people who completed the vocabulary review on quizzes yesterday. I know I mentioned, again, that's a great way to boost your grade. I'm happy to see the 16 people who did it. There were a couple who looked like they maybe started and then didn't go through and finish. Again, just make sure that even if you didn't go through and fill out the word roots introductory sheet at the very beginning when it was first assigned, you can still go through, fill that out, and be able to review it, because we will continue to do reviews moving forward. And it is, I think some people are seeing that it is challenging. You can't just go in, take this quiz without having looked at the words at all and expect to get that 75% that's required to get credit. So, and then for social studies, we had 37 people who turned in the civil rights figure that they want to do their project on, their mini project on. So if you're one of those 14 other people, just please get that in as soon as possible. I will be going over who got signed up for, and there were a handful of people who already came out and said that they want to do more than one person, which is great. But so that's where we were at for yesterday. And then just to tell you for today, our class plan, I'll take you through the Google form for today. Then we'll talk about Chapter 5 for Animal Farm. Today's assignment for language arts, which is to complete some of the sections on your allegory chart. I know some of you have been waiting. Now that we're about halfway through the story, characters will become more obvious. It'll be easier to fill that out. And then there is an optional Chapter 5 response for anybody who wants to do it, just to, again, have that chance to boost your grade. Then we'll transition over to social studies. We'll talk about the civil rights activist biography assignment. I'll go over who got signed up for, and then I'll also show you the assignment I sent out today, which is just an example slide and then a blank slide where you will be creating your actual biography slide. Like I said, if we were all together, we would actually be doing this in Google Sites. This was a new project that we did last year. Students really seemed to enjoy. Wanted to try to incorporate it here into e-learning. So this hopefully will be as close as we can do where everybody gets the chance to complete it. So before we move into today, let's just look at yesterday's journal highlights. So we said that this week, because we're going to be doing some more intensive reading and then some writing, going through our first remote learning vocab unit, I didn't want to go too overwhelming on the journal prompts. So instead, we're just doing some poll type questions. And so yesterday's was looking at pizza toppings, and it said you can only save up to 3 pizza toppings for the rest of time. Which ones are you choosing? The 3 winners, the top 3, were pepperoni and then sausage and then bacon. So if you'll look at the chart that I have there, and it looks like my head's not blocking any of it, but up towards the top is where all of the different meat options were, and those were clearly so much more popular than the vegetables and things like that were more towards the bottom. So I was a little surprised that one of the veggies didn't sneak into the top 3. But for our top 5, like I said, you had pepperoni, sausage, bacon. The number 4 was actually pineapple that got 9 votes. And then both Black Olives and Canadian Bacon had 8 votes. And then the one that just missed out in the top 5 would have been Mushrooms, that got 7. There were a couple people who mentioned they would have put extra cheese. I thought about putting that on there, so I apologize if that was one that you were looking for that wasn't on there. But in terms of Indian Creek 8th graders, our ultimate 3-topping pizza, as voted on by all of you, would basically be a meat lovers with pepperoni, sausage, and bacon on it. So now let's just jump over to today's plan, or today's form. I mentioned that part 1, Animal Farm, and it tells you here, and I'll remind you again, the boxes to fill out on your allegory chart for today, I would like you to fill out Snowball, Napoleon, and Molly. And that includes both the allegory and the connection to the Russian Revolution into history. So it's 6 boxes total. And then I just mentioned that we'll be talking about Chapter 5. Hopefully, the majority of you read it yesterday. There were a lot of important things that happened in Chapter 5. It's kind of a major turning point in the story. And then we'll talk about the allegory chart more tomorrow. I also said there would be an optional writing response, and that you, if you want full credit, you have to answer the prompt fully. And then for our attendance response, again, I didn't have anybody send in any ideas for poll questions, and unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but just for people who are looking for a little bit of a mix-up, the easiest types of poll questions seem to be ones that are food-related. So just like yesterday's, today's is also food-related. We're now talking about ice cream flavors. You can only save 3 ice cream flavors for the rest of the time. Which ones are you saving? We have vanilla, chocolate, strawberry, all the way down here towards the end with like mango, cherry, pistachio. I tried to think of some of the more popular ones, but obviously if you have one that you like that's not on there, you can include that as one of your 3 as well. But remember, you only get to vote for 3. And also you can keep in mind things like, remember, you're not only going to be eating these, in a sundae or in a cone, but also like if you're wanting to make a shake or do anything like that, you're going to need these or the ice creams you're going to have available for that as well. So that's today's poll question. I'll have the results from that on my stream tomorrow. All right, but now let's jump into the meat of our language arts class for today, looking back through Animal Farm, and we are now up to Chapter 5, which is where we see Napoleon take control of the farm. So we'll begin with our summary. Just briefly, Molly continues to distance herself from the beliefs of animalism and eventually disappears, only to reappear as the new carriage horse of another human. Her new master strokes her coat, dresses her in ribbons, and feeds her sugar, and the other animals never speak of her again. So Molly was always one of the characters who's kind of outspoken, didn't really jive with animalism, wanted things like pretty ribbon, sugar, didn't really want to work if she didn't have to. And it got to the point where, she kind of gets confronted by Clover, who sees Molly interacting with one of the other humans, with one of Mr. Pilkington's men, letting him touch her coat, things like that. And Molly tries to deny this, and it turns out that, Molly just isn't interested in being part of Animal Farm and following animalism. She'd rather have things given to her, even if that means that she's going to be working under a human master. So she's off the farm. Molly's over and done. A character that most people don't really seem to enjoy that much. And also one that I'm going to be asking you to fill out on your allegory chart as well. She didn't really ever take any role on the farm. She was always questioning things. If you remember back when animals are learning how to read, she only takes the time to learn the letters that spell out her own name. She just learns M-O-L-I-N-E, and then spends time using sticks and branches and things to spell out her own name. So very self-centered, very interested in pretty things, not interested in working, and never a character who really jived with the beliefs of animalism. So then Snowball and Napoleon continue to rival one another. Snowball is a better speaker at meetings, but Napoleon gathers support for himself in other ways. Snowball eventually comes up with an idea for a windmill, which he claims could greatly improve the animals' lives. Building it would be a challenge, and Napoleon claims that the farm's current needs, like food production, should take precedence. Once Snowball has completed his plans, the animals gather to vote on building the windmill. Snowball gives an inspirational speech that seems to swing the vote in his favor, but just as the vote is about to begin, Napoleon gives a whimper that brings 9 vicious dogs into the barn. They attack Snowball and chase him off the farm. Napoleon takes control of the farm and says that the pigs will make all decisions moving forward. Squealer claims that this is in the best interest of the farm, as the pigs are the cleverest animals. He also claims that Snowball was a traitor all along and that they actually will be building the windmill after all. Squealer claims that this was Napoleon's brilliant plan to force Snowball out, and his words, in combination with the menacing growls of his dog bodyguards, are enough to convince the other animals to accept his explanation. So goes into more about how Snowball and Napoleon, they're still kind of the two in charge. The other animals, it's talked about how they kind of go back and forth. Whichever one of them spoke last tends to be the one that they agree with. Both Snowball and Napoleon, they can't agree on anything. You know, there's a section that talks about if one wants to plant a field with barley, the other one says it should be for hay. And they go back and forth on everything. And this idea of the windmill is one that turns out to kind of be the breaking point, to where obviously Napoleon, as we'll talk about a little bit more, but those puppies that he took off to raise on his own, he has raised them to be his kind of private bodyguards, takes the chance when he sees it to have them attack Snowball. Snowball's gone. The only person left with the opportunity to rule the farm or to be in charge of the farm is Napoleon. All right. So some characters who are introduced, the dogs come up. These are the 9 puppies that Napoleon had raised away from the other animals. They are now not quite fully grown, but obviously much grown up than just puppies. And they are vicious dogs who do Napoleon's bidding, and they chase Snowball off of the farm. And then we also just briefly learn of a character named Minimus, and he is a pig who, quote unquote, had a remarkable gift for composing songs and poems. So he's another pig, one who's in charge of getting out some of Napoleon's message. And he's, again, writing songs and poems, these pieces of art. I'm sure most of you can guess what, or more specifically who, most of his songs and poems are going to be focused upon. And then, even though it's not truly a character, I also wanted to just talk about the windmill, because it is a major idea that leads to the meeting where Snowball is kicked off of the farm. Snowball talks about how the windmill could generate electricity, it could automate a lot of the jobs on the farm and give the animals a lot more free time. He admits that it would be hard to build, but worth the commitment because of the long run payoff. And the windmill is a major point of disagreement between Snowball and Napoleon. Napoleon says that food production and building up the farm's defenses, they should be the focus, not these dreams that Snowball comes up with. But once Snowball is gone, once he's been chased off the farm, Squealer goes around to the other animals and claims that no, Napoleon has supported building the windmill all along, and he just pretended to be against it in order to trick Snowball and eventually get him off of the farm. And then Squealer goes into more about how Snowball was a traitor, and that it's been Napoleon all along who's been driving this idea of the windmill. You know, he even goes so far as to claim that Snowball stole the idea of the windmill from Napoleon. So the windmill, definitely a major controversy and very important point in the story. So now we'll just talk about some important quotes from the chapter. There are a few in here, so I'll try to go through them quickly. On page 16, it said it had come to be accepted that the pigs, who were manifestly cleverer than the other animals, should decide all questions of farm policy, though their decisions had to be ratified by a majority vote. This arrangement would have worked well enough if it had not been for the disputes between Snowball and Napoleon. These two disagreed at every point where disagreement was possible. At the meeting, Snowball often won over the majority by his brilliant speeches, but Napoleon was better at canvassing support for himself in between times. So, based on what we see at the end of the chapter, this just gives some insight onto, in theory, their governmental setup could have really worked out well, where there's debates, the animals vote on things, and, it all could have worked out if Snowball and Napoleon had not consistently disagreed about literally everything. And that obviously sets in forth a lot of the rest of the action of the chapter. So then we move on to page 17, talking about the windmill. Says the whole farm was deeply divided on the subject of the windmill. Snowball did not deny that to build it would be a difficult business, but he maintained that it could all be done in a year. And thereafter he declared so much labor would be saved that the animals would only need to work 3 days a week. Napoleon, on the other hand, argued that the great need of the moment was to increase food production, and that if they wasted time on the windmill, they would all starve to death. So just introducing the concept of the windmill. Snowball admits it's going to be hard, but that it's going to be so worth it in the end. And then Napoleon, who's talking about food production and the dangers of not focusing on the here and now, could lead to the death of the other animals. Then here is the moment where Snowball is chased off the farm. After Napoleon gives his signal, 9 enormous dogs wearing brass-studded collars came bounding into the barn. They dashed straight for Snowball, who only sprang from his place just in time to escape their snapping jaws. They were huge dogs and as fierce-looking as wolves. They kept close to Napoleon. It was noticed that they wagged their tails to him in the same way as the other dogs had been used to do to Mr. Jones. Now, obviously very important, these dogs are grown up. I'm sure that you can see how Napoleon in all likelihood is going to use them. They chase Snowball off the farm. They're huge. They're intimidating. You can see how a person like Napoleon, or I should say an animal like Napoleon, could definitely use this to his advantage. And I just thought this was important too because of the last sentence that talks about how they wagged their tails to him just like the other dogs had to Mr. Jones. So you can see some connections here between Napoleon is now taking control, and we're already seeing some connections made between him and the old human masters. And we'll see if that comparison continues moving forward. All right, then we have here a speech from Squealer. Comrades, he said, I trust that every animal here appreciates the sacrifice that Comrade Napoleon has made in taking this extra labor upon himself. Do not imagine, comrades, that leadership is a pleasure. On the contrary, it is a deep and heavy responsibility. No one believes more firmly than Comrade Napoleon that all animals are equal. He would be only too happy to let you make your decisions for yourselves. But sometimes you might make the wrong decisions, comrades, and then where should we be? Suppose you had decided to follow Snowball with his moonshine of windmills. Snowball who, as we now know, was no better than a criminal. So some interesting points here from Squealer. Talks about the extra labor, quote unquote, that Napoleon's taking on, trying to make it out to be that he's doing this for the good of the farm. And he says no one believes more than anyone that Comrade Napoleon that all animals are equal. And, he'd be happy to let you rule for yourself, but what happens if you make mistakes? And the suggestion here is that instead of mistakes, he means more what happens if you were to do something that Napoleon doesn't want or disagrees with. This also, it first introduces something we'll see moving forward, which is this belief that, or this claim that Snowball was a criminal, a bad person, or bad pig. When obviously, you can make your own judgments, but that's not necessarily what we've seen so far in the story. But just again, Squealer taking advantage of the other animals. making it seem like Napoleon has made this great sacrifice to be the leader. He is saying that he thinks all animals should be equal. And then even by the end of this chapter, we read about a meeting where instead of all sitting together, the animals are clearly divided, where it's the pigs and then everyone else kind of sitting around them and watching. And obviously clearly setting some precedents that are not what Old Major talked about when he introduced animalism. And then one last quote here from Squealer, again talking to the animals after it's said that they are going to build the windmill. And it says that Squealer explained privately to the other animals that Napoleon had never in reality been opposed to the windmill. He had seemed to oppose the windmill simply as a maneuver to get rid of Snowball, who was a dangerous character and a bad influence. Now that Snowball was out of the way, the plan could go forward without his interference. This, said Squealer, was something called tactics. He repeated a number of times, "Tactics, comrades, tactics," skipping round and whisking his tail with a merry laugh. The animals were not certain what the word meant, but Squealer spoke so persuasively, and the 3 dogs who happened to be with him growled so threateningly, that they accepted his explanation without further questions. So again, Squealer spreading the good word about Comrade Napoleon, coming up with this story that is going to convince the other animals, because the other animals can't really think for themselves. They don't fully understand what's going on. And so now he's making it out to where Napoleon gets all the credit for the windmill and for knowing to chase off Snowball. And don't forget that while Squealer's giving this explanation, he has these 3 menacing dogs sitting behind him growling. And obviously this is more than enough to get these other animals who can't think for themselves to just accept what he says. So really, these last 2 quotes should be kind of in your mind, showing this idea, this image of something where this is not what animalism was laid out to be. And hopefully a lot of you can see some potential dangers in how things are going. And I hate to say it, but are going to continue to go, at least for a little bit, moving forward. All right, so Napoleon is now in charge of the farm. Snowball's gone. They're still going to build the windmill, and we can see that Napoleon's got his dogs. He's got Squealer, and there are a lot of dangers potentially on the horizon for Animal Farm. All right, so here again is just an update of what the barn is looking like. I promise that moving forward we'll have some changes, but just again, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, and the 7 commandments of animalism. All right, and then so for today, we're actually on to your assignment. After reading Chapter 5 of Animal Farm, please complete the allegory chart for Snowball, Napoleon, and Molly. And so we'll just come over here to the allegory chart. So remember, we're looking at both the allegory person or group, which here is your word bank, and then also your connection between the allegory, between the historical figure group and the character in the book. So for example, once you think you know who Napoleon represents from history, your support would be, what do you see from Napoleon, and what do you know about this person that he's an allegory for? How can you connect the two? So for Napoleon, you want to think about someone who is a leader, someone who took control of Russia, someone who, was maybe not a very fair leader, rose to the top, kicked a rival out, and so on and so forth. So Napoleon, Snowball, and then down here onto the next page, Molly. Those are the 3 to fill out for today. That is your language arts assignment. All right, and I'll be going over that tomorrow in the stream here. And then for those of you who are interested, here is the additional assignment that you can do. It's a writing response about Chapter 5. It's looking at that speech from Squealer that we looked at as one of our important quotes. And the question is that, thinking objectively, so being the intelligent reader that you are, what is a claim that Squealer makes in this speech that you feel is false, even though it might convince the animals who are listening? In other words, what is something Squealer says in here that you know or that you think is not true, and why? All right, so should be relatively easy, again, for anyone who wants that extra work, that extra practice, but it is an optional assignment. As long as you give a full answer, you get full credit, but obviously just one sentence or so will not be enough. All right, so that's it for language arts for today. Now, why don't we jump on over to social studies? So we had our civil rights era biography assignment, and your assignment from yesterday, which it was like 37 people had completed, was to look over the list of activists here, choose the one, or for some of you, choose the ones that you would like to do a biography about, do some research, look into how they impacted the civil rights movement. And then, move forward the rest of this week with doing some research and putting together a slide for them. So most of you did do that, and I shared out today on Google Classroom this slide deck. It just says Civil Rights Activist Biography Slides. I gave you an example slide for one of the people that no one had claimed, who was Ralph David Abernathy. And I just gave you an example of what your slide could look like. So you can see that there's a picture. It gives his birth date, his death date. Here on the left side is some biographical information, his early life, his education, the fact that he became a full-time minister in Montgomery, and this is how he became friends with Martin Luther King Jr. And then here on the right side, it talks about Abernathy's specific involvement in the civil rights movement. So there was a whole lot more I could have written. I made the text bigger just so that you could read it. You could see some of the things included. Obviously, you don't need to make it this big, and you can include much more information about your historical figure if you find it during your research. All right. And then the other thing I want to draw your attention to is that I have down here in the speaker notes two sources that I used to get this information. So please don't forget, copy and paste the address or the information for your sources into the speaker notes. So here, this third slide, this empty slide just says create your slide here. You've got your title. There's two text columns. You can include pictures, but lay it out however you want. You don't need to follow my template. You don't need to follow this. Just as long as you are giving biographical information. And actually here we can come back and I can go over again the things that you're looking at. So as long as you include the basics such as birth and death dates and places, at least one picture, a brief biography, and then a section that explains how your person impacted the civil rights era, you can lay it out. And I don't feel the need to follow my example or the example that was given. And I don't know, it looks like I think my internet just checked out. But so that is just an example for you, for however you want to lay out your biography slides. So remember that today and tomorrow was meant to be research, and then Thursday, Friday was meant to be your days of actually creating your slides. All right, and then the last thing, let's see if this will actually kick on. I apologize. I have no idea what happened. It doesn't look like the stream stopped or the internet kicked out. It's just all of my Windows here decided to reload. But I was going to bring up the list that I had created of the people who had been signed up for, and then also the ones who had not been, just in case there were people who still were trying to think about who they could do their slides on, if they wanted to do it on a brand new person. Because we did have some people who were signed up for by like 3 or 4 different students. I don't know if this was coordinated. I didn't go into that much research in terms of looking at specifically who signed up for which figure. But there were a lot actually who had more than one person sign up for them. So here we go. I apologize again about the technical difficulties. But these are the civil rights activists so far who have been chosen here on the left side of the screen, the ones that are more filled out. So you can see that's 20. There are 20 different activists who've been signed up for. And then we also have, that means exactly 20 who have not been signed up for by anybody. So if you are one of those people who did not get to choose your person yet, or if you're thinking about maybe doing a second person but don't know who, maybe you want to pick one of these other figures here who hasn't been chosen by anyone else, just to give you the opportunity to look into someone who your classmates haven't. I can tell you that there are a lot of interesting people left. I mean, all these people are interesting. None of these people that we picked are not worth looking into the life of and the impact of. But if you're looking for an activist, these are the ones who have chosen and who haven't been chosen. All right, so for today, for social studies, just be researching your activist, looking for biographical information, birth date, death date, then how they impacted the civil rights movement. And then for language arts, you're filling out the allegory chart for Napoleon, for Snowball, for Molly, both columns, so that's 6 boxes total. And then if you want to do the optional Chapter 5 writing response, you can do that as well. All right, but again, that one's optional. And then the rest of the week, our optional assignments will all be vocab Unit 10 related. All right, so that's all I have for today. Like I said, I hope everyone had a great day yesterday. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day today. It's still so odd to think that this is the reality for the rest of our school year. And so I hope, again, that everyone is just doing as well as they can with this unprecedented situation. I miss everyone. Again, I'm sure I'll say this a bunch more times on these streams. I feel awful that we're not going to get to be together in classes again. So if you have any questions about schoolwork, any social questions, and just anything else going on that you want to reach out, myself and the rest of the teachers and the rest of the adults at Indian Creek are here to do what we can for you. So please do not hesitate, because like I said, this is something that we're stronger together, and we're all going to do the best that we can for you. But otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow with another stream. And until then, I hope everyone has a great rest of your day. All right, this has been Professor Blazek. Everyone stay well, and I will see you next time.